Howdy doody everybody, and welcome back to my journey across the United States. Today we're covering cryptids and strange encounters in the great state of Vermont. Now if you like weird folklore with a touch of the supernatural, I think you'd enjoy our little community here at Storytime, and I'd love it if you'd come and join our awesome community of people who love lore of all shapes and sizes. With a like, a subscription, and a comment, it would mean the world to me, and it would tell YouTube, hey, this guy's alright. With this in mind, sit back, relax, and maybe even start a fire to get that chimney, as you put it, puffing smoke, and enjoy our strange journey through the odd creatures encountered in Vermont. To start this video, we're going to be going through the land-dwelling creatures of Vermont's lore that you won't really see anywhere else. The Wampahoofus is perhaps the most unique cryptid that supposedly inhabits or inhabited Vermont, and it holds a solid top 5 ranking for me within the region of New England. Like most of the fearsome critters of American folklore, it is not only fun with a heck of a story, but also it's ever so slightly believable. In other words, if you squint a little bit, you start to picture a creature that might have existed. The Wampahoofus is also known as the Sidehill Gouger, and it was a fearsome critter of American folklore said to inhabit the mountainous terrain of Vermont. It was described as a large mammal, resembling a hybrid kind of between a deer and a wild boar or something. The Wampahoofus was believed to have lived primarily on Mount Mansfield, specifically between about 2,600 and 3,200 feet in elevation. Occasional reports also placed it deep in the forested areas of the wilderness near Bridgewater, Vermont. These creatures were said to be perfectly adapted to life on Vermont's steep slopes, and their most notable anatomical feature was asymmetrical leg length, aka the legs on one side of their body were shorter than on the other, allowing them to move efficiently along the contour lines of hillsides. Males, it said, reportedly moved clockwise around the mountain, while females moved counterclockwise, kind of like a weird Dr. Seuss character. The only problem with this adaptation confined them to specific elevation bands, and they stayed off of the summits and away from the valleys. In short, basically where they were born elevation-wise, and maybe rolled a bit, they lived their life, right there in a circle around the mountaintop. Now, mating season was the only time males and females would interact, meeting mid-slope where their circular paths intersected, and after figuring out whose legs went where in this interaction, it was said that the female would lay approximately 8 eggs in a hillside burrow. Despite their awkward proportions, Wampahoofuses were also said to be pretty fast-moving, though of course only horizontally on sloped terrain following the contour of the hill, because they couldn't move vertically up or down the slope without difficulty. And while it said they would attack people they came across, folks could pretty easily escape them by just climbing or descending the mountain just a little bit. This same limitation made them vulnerable to hunters, who could lure them to the summit or into a valley, where their uneven legs rendered them virtually immobile except for running in circles. Now, according to folklore, their extinction, while spurred on a bit by hunting, was ultimately caused by an evolutionary mismatch. Over generations, you see, the male's right legs and the female's left legs continued to shrink, eventually making physical mating impossible, which in fairness is probably nature's way of saying you've peaked. Additionally, legends claim that some individuals were occasionally born with reversed limb configurations, meaning they traveled the opposite direction that was typical for a Wampahoofus of their sex, sort of like being attracted to women but forced to scroll through the men on Tinder. Regardless, it's said that when two same-sex Wampahoofuses traveling in opposite directions encountered each other on the mountainside, rather than suck up their differences and embrace in a kiss, the only way to pass was to fight, often to the death, and this contributed to their extinction as well. So, ultimately, though extinct, the Wampahoofus does live on a little bit in regional memory. See, folklorist Joe Citro, because in Vermont it's always Joe Citro, noted that a University of Vermont professor named Ray Buchanan once saw a rock formation on Mount Mansfield that reminded him of a Wampahoofus, and thus he named a trail after it. So nowadays, as you head up Mount Mansfield, you're bound to remember this creature. Now, if you want to hike this trail, for memory's sake, the Wampahoofus Trail can be reached by hiking the Butler Lodge Trail from Stevensville Trailhead in Underhill Center. Also, fun fact, some say that terracets, small step-like ridges often found on grassy hillsides throughout Vermont, are the remnants of ancient Wampahoofus movement, preserving the geological imprint of the creature's former range. The Pigman of Northfield, Vermont is a piece of local folklore that blurs the line between cryptid and ghost story, depending on how it's told. Reports of the Pigman began circulating in 1971, though details and versions vary depending on who's telling them. The most commonly referenced incident that started it all comes from a group of teenagers attending a high school dance in Northfield. As the story goes, during the event, several students snuck out to a nearby sand pit behind the school to drink some PG-13 beverages, and while they were there, they reportedly encountered a strange figure. Now, at first, one account I saw said the kids thought this was a police officer, here to teach them a lesson. But to their surprise, the creature was no man, and was rather described as large, naked, covered in white hair, walking upright on two legs, and having a deformed face resembling that of a pig. The encounter frightened the students, though, enough so that some of them ran back inside the school in tears, and others went out to investigate, but the figure was already gone. Now, shortly after this event, additional sightings were reported. For instance, a local farmer claimed he heard a disturbance on his property, and he went outside to investigate. Now, he initially believed that he was seeing a person rummaging through the trash, but upon calling out to what he supposed was a vagrant, the figure stood up and was described as a pig-faced, humanoid-like creature before fleeing into the dark. These accounts led the community to believe that something unusual might be happening. And yes, no crap, something unusual was most certainly happening. Now, at this point, residents began to connect the sightings to a local unsolved case: the disappearance of a teenager named Sam Harris, not the atheist podcaster Sam Harris, FYI. See, in proper trick-or-treat fashion, Sam vanished on the night of October 30th of 1951, the night before Halloween. Accounts suggest he left his family farm, armed with eggs, to cause some mischief. Many say heading in the direction of his high school, where he knew some of his not-so-well-liked teachers would remain parked, working late. But he never returned. A large-scale search involving hundreds of people yielded no trace of him either. Now, at first, the loss of Sam was simply a tragic truth of this relatively rural community. But over time, rumors spread that Sam Harris had either fallen victim to this strange pig-like creature that folks were seeing around town, or had somehow become it. That's right, some versions of the story suggest that his mischievous nature brought him to the attention of a malevolent supernatural force, sometimes identified as the devil, resulting in his transformation into the Pigman. Because of this, some locals actually refer to the Pigman as Sam Harris, referring to the two sort of interchangeably. Now, in the years following the initial sightings, more reports surfaced. The creature was frequently seen near a local feature called the Devil's Washbowl, an area just outside of the local Washbowl Road that's got basin-like terrain, streams, waterfalls, and caves. And it most certainly sounds like a rejected name for a theme park ride or the least popular item at a Vermont diner. Here, witnesses time and time again described a disfigured humanoid creature darting across roads, and teenagers parked in this secluded area who, as we've previously discussed, were most certainly reading the Bible together in the back of their cars at night claimed that the figure approached or even knocked on their car windows. One group of individuals, including a person named Jeff Hatch, actually went out searching for the creature and reportedly discovered a cave in the Washbowl area. Inside, they found what they claimed were animal bones, and hoof-like prints were said to cover the grounds nearby. There were also some rumors that these bones were human, though you'd expect a bit more proof if that was the case. Today, the Pigman is considered a fixture of Northfield folklore. Teenagers continue to explore the area in hopes of encountering the creature, and a local brewery, Good Measure Brewing, even released a promotional beer named Pigman Lives. Some believe the legend could be a misinterpretation of regional Bigfoot-like sightings, of course, but personally, I like that this creature sort of breaks the mold of the typical hairy cryptid and is instead something largely unique. A man, or I suppose a boy, whose mischievous ways may have turned him into something gluttonous, not necessarily for food though, but for causing misadventure to others. Lake Bomazene is the largest lake located entirely within Vermont, stretching roughly 9 to 14 miles in length. See, the name Bomazene comes from the Abenaki language, and it's said to mean keeper of the ceremonial fire, which sadly I don't think has anything to do with the cryptid we're about to talk about. That being said, this lake is home to at least one notable island in its northern portion, Rabbit Island, which plays a role in both ghost stories and local cryptid legend. To start, I know this is the cryptids video, but there's a ghost story along the way that tells that in the 1800s, Lake Bomazene was bordered by slate-producing mountains, and many slate workers lived and labored in the area. One ghost story from that era involves a group of these workers who decided to row across the lake from the west side to the east side one evening to do what is quite possibly the worst thing you can do while on a boat, although still popular: drink. Now, afterwards, of course, they attempted to row back to the west side, but for obvious reasons, they never quite made it. Their empty boat was discovered floating on the lake the next morning. Since then, some have reported sightings of phantom rowboaters on Lake Bomazene moving along without creating any sort of wake. Spooky, spooky stuff, I know. Now, maybe they just fell in because they were intoxicated, or, hear me out, maybe they were eaten by wabbits. See, our next stop is this lake's island, named Rabbit Island. Well, admittedly, there are a couple of islands, but this one is a small island on the lake, which is at the center of a different kind of legend. It's said to be home to a population of unusually large rabbits with glowing eyes. According to accounts shared by Vermont folklorist Joseph Citro yet again, which is probably, I don't know, the third time I've brought him up, the island lies just 30 to 40 feet from the mainland, a distance small and medium-sized rabbits could leap, which kind of frankly makes these so-called normal rabbits cryptids in their own right. Regardless, these supposed rabbits with supernatural jumping abilities reportedly used to travel back and forth between the island and the mainland. However, the largest of these rabbits were unable to make the jump and remained on the island, forming an isolated population. Over time, natural selection is said to have favored increased size, and the larger rabbits left on Rabbit Island supposedly grew larger with each generation. Some stories claim these rabbits are now as large as dogs, and in some extreme accounts, even as large as cars. Some versions of the legend even suggest that the stories of these creatures predate modern history and were told by the Abenaki people. One of these stories, and okay, hear me out, this is insane and totally whitewashed history, tells of an initiation ritual of the Abenaki people that called for a young member of the tribe to hunt for a bear. Now, in some stories, this isn't just a rite of passage, but is rather an act of necessity, given a tribe ran out of food in the middle of winter. Regardless, due to whatever this need was, the young brave paddled out into the middle of Lake Bomazene, intending to paddle to its west side from the east side to search for bears in an area where they were known to be more plentiful. But along the way, he observed something extremely large dart into the woods in his periphery on Rabbit Island. Now, in his mind, it said he thought this was actually simply just a bear that had swam onto the island at one point for food. And so he docked his canoe here, drew his bow, and proceeded into the forest. He, of course, after searching for about an hour and tracking what he described to be unusual footprints for a bear, would come across the bear. I say bear in quotes. He'd draw his arrow out and fire at the target, striking it near the neck, but when it turned around, it was no bear, but rather our favorite gigantic lagomorphs of Vermont. The rabbit would then do a few rabbit things, such as stomp on the ground so loudly that it made the skies clap like thunder before collapsing. Now, the brave here was confused as all get out about what just happened, and of course, regardless, took his hunt back to his tribe. Whatever they were expecting, this wasn't it, but apparently they ate it anyways, and he was lauded for his achievement. That's the story I suppose I came across, which reads like a really bad MMO quest that you'd get in the starter village. But hey, don't shoot the messenger. Regardless of how crazy this cryptid is, here and there you'll still see people paddling around Rabbit Island in kayaks and canoes. Now, they're probably just doing this to catch a glimpse of the bird population that lives on the island, but maybe they're also trying to catch a glimpse of giant rabbits that are said to live here. In 1925, weird reports emerged from Richford and Berkshire, Vermont, of, I kid you not, a winged creature resembling a mythical griffin. The first recorded sighting involved two sawmill workers crossing the Main Street Bridge in Richford. Now, as they approached a building, which I'm not sure which one it is today, but it's called the Borite Building, or at least it was back in the day, they noticed a large beast perched on the rooftop, staring at them. Descriptions of the creature said it was gray in color, it had a wingspan of roughly 20 feet, a serpent-like tail, and talons large enough to grasp the girth of an old-fashioned milk can, which is surprisingly not that big for a mythical griffin. Unfortunately, but in classic old-timey fashion, one of the men reportedly suffered a fear-induced heart attack from the encounter. Though I will mention he did survive this, but afterwards he was said to have recurring nightmares and bouts of screaming during the night. Now, I couldn't find any evidence that this man was a World War I veteran, but this sounds like some World War I veteran stuff rather than Griffin-induced stuff. But hey, no judgment, even though it was the 1920s. Now, following this event, additional sightings were reported throughout the region. Locals claimed the creature continued to appear, unnerving residents and causing panic. Farmers described seeing the creature flying over their fields and landing on rooftops, and sometimes even stealing cattle in one instance, which, again, shouldn't be super easy to do when you have itty-bitty talons that are only just large enough to hold a milk bottle. Now, one specific sighting involved a woman named Oella Hopkins, who encountered the creature while hanging laundry outside. After her dog began barking uncontrollably, something I'm too familiar with, she looked towards the farmhouse and saw the beast staring at her. Frightened, she fled inside and hid for several hours, which is again a hilariously stereotypical reaction for an old-timey housewife in media. Sightings of the creature reportedly continued until around 1928, at which point they sharply declined. However, sporadic reports have occurred since. And let's be clear, throughout the years, this griffin has distinctly changed into something more prehistoric. For instance, one later witness, Lisa Maskell from Montgomery, Vermont, claimed to have seen the creature near the Trout River during her childhood and believed it resembled a pterodactyl when she later saw pictures of one. Admittedly, I could find no record of when her childhood was. In 2006, 2 additional sightings were reported of a large winged entity flying in the skies of northern Vermont that were described as looking pterodactyl-like. Also, we should be clear, while the creature was never reported to have directly attacked humans, something you should keep in mind if you see it, I guess, there was one account suggesting it may have been seen flying away with something crying in its grasp, speculated by witnesses to be either a small animal or, less likely, possibly a human infant. Now, that would be a very sad reinterpretation of the already sad Dingo Ate My Baby saga, that's for sure. Though unverified, which is a fancy way to say, though likely fabricated, some sources have also suggested this Vermont winged creature may have attracted and influenced H.P. Lovecraft's mythos, and that he even traveled out to Vermont to try and find this creature. Again, I don't really believe this one. Over time, theories about the creature's identity may have varied too. Most regard the 1925 sighting as a hoax or a mass misperception, sort of like a game of telephone where one person says, "I saw a griffin," and then the next person sees a bald eagle without knowing what it is and goes, "Oh, that's big and flying, it must be a griffin." Others believe it could be related to other winged cryptids, such as the thunderbird, the Jersey devil, Mothman, or even a surviving pterosaur, of course. Admittedly, I kid you not, if you can bring me evidence of a pterosaur flying around in Vermont of all places, given to my knowledge they were cold-blooded, I'll just give you this channel. Regardless, despite my skepticism, the legend remains part of Vermont folklore, and I personally love and appreciate these sorts of stories. So, pterodactyl thing of Vermont, thank you for existing. So, to be clear, when I wrote the saga on the awful part of the script, I was happy covering just one dinosaur, and totally ignorant of the fact that there would be more, but here I am, about to tell you about more cryptids in Vermont that apparently are actually just dinosaurs that, for whatever reason, despite their cold-blooded nature, have persisted in your state rather than anywhere else. Now, the first story tells of a creature that I've seen largely referred to as the Groton Godzilla. And as it goes, in the late 1960s, this reported dinosaur sighting, I can't believe I'm saying that, occurred near Big Deer Campground in Groton, located in Caledonia County, Vermont. Here, Jane Desorda, a resident of Waterbury, was vacationing with her family on a sunny day, when she claimed to have seen a dinosaur-like creature slither across the road and into a swampy area on the opposite side. That was the sighting. Now, my impression is it was sort of short-lived, non-threatening, and to the point. Her husband reportedly saw the same creature, though the children, who were with them at the time, were asleep and missed the sighting in classic child-on-vacation fashion. The Desorda family later recounted the event to Vermont folklorist Joseph Citro, which I've tallied it up actually this time. Our Citro count is now 3 in this video, and the family described the creature as about 10 feet long, tan in color, and with an arched neck and a large hump on its back. While it resembled an alligator in body shape, it reportedly had legs splayed to the side rather than tucked underneath. The couple compared it to various saurian dinosaurs, such as the Megalosaurus or Iguanodon. Okay, so this is the first dinosaur-like thing, and if this was the only one, I'd be like, hey, this is totally reasonable. You probably just saw an alligator or a crocodile, or maybe if you were lucky, this was a rogue Gila monster or Komodo dragon. Regardless, as you'll see, this wasn't the case though. See, a few years later, in 1971, another sighting occurred, and this one's wild, when P.G. Levesque reported encountering a creature near an old family farm. Now, according to Levesque, the creature resembled a miniature, get this, Stegosaurus, described as slightly larger than a woodchuck, so that's pretty tiny, and it was covered in thick black fur, and yeah, that's pretty weird. Also, a separate older man in the area claimed to have seen a similar animal, which suggests a small population, or at least a repeat sighting of the same creature. Okay, now we're getting weird. Not only can I not explain to you what creature looks like a Stegosaurus in modern day, but I also can't explain which one is hairy. Okay, going on, that's not the end of the dinosaur saga. Also, in 2007, a woman named Janice, who lived outside of Burlington, Vermont, reported seeing a creature about the size of a raccoon that bore a strong resemblance to an ankylosaur. She described it as having armored plating on its head, a turtle-like shell across its back, and a distinctive club-shaped tail. This sighting occurred early on a summer morning. Alright, and with that one, I feel like I've lost my marbles, and I'm now picturing a raccoon in a dinosaur costume or something. Regardless, if you can't tell, from pterodactyls to land-dwelling prehistoric beasts, Vermont is strangely looking more and more like Jurassic Park. And if you enjoyed these, there's more too on the way. Just keep in mind, these next entries, after we discuss some hairy big-footed boys, are going to be dinosaurs of the water-dwelling variety. So as I said, next we're going to move on and cover your big-footed boys, before we cover aquatic cryptids. In other words, your various interpretations of something that could reasonably be likened to the old Patterson-Gimlin film superstar, Bigfoot. Now I should note, these aren't all explicitly Bigfoot variants, but through a modern lens, they're almost all certainly something you could throw into that bucket, or maybe they're just old interpretations of a dogman or some other variety of folklore. Whatever they are, stick around and take a look at these very unusual Vermont-specific iterations of large hairy beasts in the woods. And to start, of course, we're going to start with what's referred to as the Black Beast of Snake Mountain. Now, Snake Mountain, also known as Grandview Mountain, sits on the western side of Vermont, and while this so-called mountain is technically more of a hill by Vermont standards, by Michigan standards it would be Mount Everest, and its prominence of 1,200 feet stands out against the relatively flat terrain of the surrounding region, so I'll give it a pass. This mountain, I should note, is no stranger to having unusual geology or weird wildlife, as it hosts a large wildlife management area and has a kettle lake called Cranberry Bog, a geological remnant of the old glaciers that called the region home. Also, this place isn't particularly popular, and unlike other parts of Vermont, you won't find many Subarus or flannel-wearing hikers here. Snake Mountain, like its hometown of Addison, Vermont, is quiet, isolated, and carries an eerie stillness, even though it's relatively near the touristy shores of Lake Champlain. Now, this seclusion may have made it the ideal setting for whispered tales of a strange creature known as the Black Beast of Snake Mountain. Said to have terrorized the area in the early 1900s, the beast was never described in detail in any formal documentation or primary sources, other than being said to be large in size with sharp claws and red eyes. But oral history sometimes compares it to the wood devils of New Hampshire, a lanky, elusive, Bigfoot-like creature. Though unlike the shy wood devils, the Black Beast was reportedly aggressive and bold, a master of lurking in the shadows but popping out with a firm "hi-ya" when necessary. Also, I should be clear, no documentation conveys that this is any sort of bear or Sasquatch. I'm just throwing it in this bucket because it's known to be large and hairy. But the case could easily be made that this falls into Dogman, Wendigo, or Skinwalker lore as well. According to accounts cited by folklorist Joe Citro, that's number 4, the creature once chased a woman driving alone at night near Snake Mountain. As it pursued her along a winding mountain road, she sped, trying to get away from it. But the thing is, this creature was easily able to keep up with her speeding vehicle, even on the winding, steep mountain roads. This convinced her that she wouldn't be able to outrun it, and when she saw a farmhouse in the distance, she decided to stop and hail it for some help. Upon parking there, the beast leapt onto her hood and began slashing at the car as she laid on the horn, trying to scare it away. and this noise brought the family of the farm outside. And when the floodlights hit the beast and revealed it, the farmer's wife screamed and ran back indoors, and the woman in the car took the opportunity to try to make a dart for the home. The men, meanwhile, armed themselves and rushed out, but by then the beast had vanished into the dark, perhaps sensing the incoming threat. Other stories followed. Children working on nearby farms claimed the beast would leap from the tree limbs to frighten them. Some tried shooting it, but no one ever succeeded in hitting the creature, with bullets supposedly phasing straight through the beast, before it would vanish in front of its assailants. Now, despite multiple sightings and rumors, the Black Beast of Snake Mountain was never actually captured or verified. After the 1930s, the story ceased. There were no more sightings, and there was no more evidence. Now, I do think it's quite interesting and worth highlighting that this Black Beast, in its earlier iterations, was quite scary and physically menacing, but the later accounts were more playful, even menacing in a prankster sort of way. That makes me wonder if the latter accounts were even of the same creature, or if it just was kind of a spring-heeled jack-like tall tale after all. Also, I have one more detail that I think is crucial to note. I read a few sources that claim in Abenaki folklore, the region around Snake Mountain was known to be home to something akin to the Wendigo. And by golly, in that first story of the beast chasing the woman's car at ungodly speeds, it at least reminded me of the many accounts we hear of skinwalkers chasing cars and keeping up with them in the Native American reservations of the American West. Something Wendigos are, at least speed stat-wise, more than capable of accomplishing through documentation of their physical feats. Did you think the same? Regardless, lucky for the modern folks in the area. Whatever this beast was, it seems like it's gone dormant or is gone forever. However, if you decide to visit this region, keep one eye open at night and watch your rearview mirror as you drive around. You never know if today's the day where the beast of Snake Mountain makes a comeback. This next story takes us to Essex County, Vermont in the mid-1700s, an area that was wild to say the least. Animals, including black bears, were abundant, and oftentimes their escapades would be documented in local newsprints such as the Gazetteer and Vermont Heritage, newspapers that documented the story of Slipperyskin I'm about to tell. Through these journals, tales began to circulate about an unusually cunning black bear known as Slipperyskin. Among the region's Wabanaki people, he was called Wayjuk, meaning wet skin, and he became infamous for his uncanny ability to avoid every trap set for him, definitely more Jerry than Tom. Now, at the time, this area was primarily inhabited by Native Americans, though it was increasingly shared with woodsmen, trappers, hunters, and fishermen. Also, going alongside this saga was something else of significance outside of a large, slippery black bear, the French and Indian War. The colonists, you see, were at war with New France to the north, and a handful of Native American allies they had. This war, it's worth noting, was largely about grabbing whatever territory you could, and it's in the midst of this war that pretty much all of this saga of Slipperyskin occurred. Now, to European settlers, Slipperyskin became more than a nuisance. He was a legendary troublemaker, almost, saying it again, spring-heeled jack-like in character. This supposed black bear, I say in quotes, was known to terrorize livestock, overturn woodpiles, throw rocks, and even spring bear traps deliberately. He developed a reputation as a deliberate mischief maker. Now, to me personally, he sounds an awful lot like the French loup-garou, werewolf-like tricksters, and given Vermont's proximity to French Quebec, I do have to wonder if this is indeed part of his origin. Regardless, the earliest written mention of Slipperyskin comes from 1759 when a man named Duluth, a scout with British Major Robert Rogers' Rangers, passed through the region after a raid on Odanak. These Rangers were essentially here as part of the war effort, laying claim to the land in northern Vermont. As his group traveled near Memphremagog Bay, he reported that a large bear had been throwing pine cones and nuts at them from trees, an unnerving harassment that caused great unease among the scouts. Sightings and stories of Slipperyskin continued well into the 1800s. For instance, in Leamington, Vermont, he became known as the Troublesome Bear, infamous for tearing down fences, stalking livestock, and, most bizarrely, running upright on his hind legs, leaving wagon wheel-sized tracks behind him. He was even said to squeeze sap from maple trees with his strong arms and frighten townspeople purely for amusement. hunt. Now, some of the townspeople did what you think folks on the frontier might do. They would shoot at Slipperyskin, but Slipperyskin never, and I mean never, got hit. His antics weren't confined to Lymington either. In Maidstone, he allegedly filled sap buckets with rocks, threw barbed wire into hay rakes and mowing machines, and raided smokehouses. At one point in 1813, then-Governor Jonas Gayusha, an experienced hunter, vowed to put an end to Slipperyskin. Keep in mind, at this point, Slipperyskin was well over 50, an age that would have made him the oldest known black bear to ever live by over a decade. After the bear was spotted in Maidstone, Gayusha, keen on earning some rural votes in an upcoming election, and to possibly gain the status of folk hero for slaying this beast, supposedly assembled a hunting party, and doused himself in a scent resembling a female bear to lure the creature. A curious choice that I could see you getting killed in a very unique way. Now, as you might expect, the plan backfired spectacularly. Gayusha soon came sprinting out of the woods, yelling, "Out of my way, boys! I'm bringing him back alive!" And then this hunting party would scatter when they saw the bear chasing him on 2 legs. No shots were fired, the creature escaped once again, and the governor not only failed in his hunt, but also lost the next election. Now, further attempts to catch Slipperyskin met similar results. In one case, a group of hunters from Morgan encountered what they thought was the bear on a logging road up Elon Mountain. They dove into the brush to prepare an ambush, only to discover it wasn't the bear coming down the mountain, but actually a massive log sent barreling towards them, presumably by the bear. They wisely ended the hunt after this near-death experience. One of the more unusual tales comes from Westmore, where German clergymen picnicking by Lake Willoughby, somewhere we'll return to soon, were scattered by Slipperyskin's sudden arrival. When one man didn't return, others feared the worst. They found what they thought were his mutilated remains, only to discover hours later it was actually nothing more than the tattered remnants of their cheese strudels that Slipperyskin had had a field day with. This missing man later turned up alive and well in Chicopee, Massachusetts. In Victor, Slipperyskin continued his tricks, interfering with schoolyards, disturbing cattle, and once being caught by hunters trying to elude them, walking backwards in the snow in his own tracks to make it appear as though he had vanished. So, as you might expect, given this saga, the legend of Slipperyskin raises questions even now, such as, is he a real bear? Unusually intelligent and long-lived, a folkloric stand-in for the Wabanaki resistance to colonization, a cryptid, an early New England variant of Bigfoot. Some have even described him as what I think is pronounced a genius loci, a spirit of place in Latin, defending the wilderness from the intrusion of European settlers. Regardless, ask as many questions as you want, but the reality isn't clear. Old documents talk about him like he's fact, and my digging suggests there really are Native American legends about old Slipperyskin. That being said, you'll find little credence for them. So whether folkloric trickster, misidentified native resistance, or supernatural entity, Slipperyskin remains one of Vermont's most persistent and peculiar legends, at least in my opinion. Next up, on our long list of intriguing run-ins with the big-footed boy himself is a tale that we'll tell next week too, but a tale I'd be ashamed to leave out of this video, as I think it's one of the most colorful tellings of Bigfoot's whereabouts in the entire state. First off, I should be clear, this story is essentially told through retellings. I couldn't find a single copy of any primary source regarding this beast, but modern lore holds that this event really did occur, and really was documented at one point in some primary source, usually in a newspaper article. Locals call this the story of the Bennington Monster, a creature that's been described as everything from a Bigfoot variety to something possibly far more ancient that actually defends the woods around modern-day Bennington and Glastonbury Mountain, that is usually said to be its home. The exact date when this occurred is kind of shaky at best, but one reference I read pins it to 1813, so we'll say that for now. And also, this occurred before Glastonbury had a proper railroad, and usually tellings say that this occurred in the spring, during the northern USA's so-called mud season. So the story goes like this. It's a dark and stormy night, because of course it is, and a stagecoach full of passengers is making the trip between Bennington and Glastonbury Mountain. These were presumably the wealthier types, because anyone without deep pockets would have just walked 10 miles through the woods like the rest of us peasants from Bennington. The horses pull the coach up a steep, muddy slope, but in classic Vermont fashion, the rain turns the dirt road into soup, and the coach gets stuck. The driver, lantern in hand, of course hops down to inspect the wheels, which he observes to be buried in mud. And then that's when he sees something. Giant footprints, bare ones, no boots, no hoofprints, just enormous five-toed impressions in the mud. Curious, he tracks the prints towards the tree line. And just as he does, something hits the stagecoach hard. The passengers, they begin to scream as the whole stagecoach tips onto its side. The wood groaning, the horses panicking, and in the flickering lamplight they see a creature as they evacuate the toppled carriage. A massive figure, taller than two grown men stacked on top of each other. It's drenched, it's covered in matted hair, and its eyes are shiny, catching the light like a deer in the headlights. Whatever it was, it watched them for a moment, and as suddenly as it appeared, the creature turned and disappeared into the forest, never to be seen again. Now look, could this all be a local legend? Absolutely. Could it be the 1800s version of a bear standing upright in the right kind of light? Also absolutely. But the thing is, whether or not you believe it was Bigfoot, this sort of sighting does appear to be the sort of creature that might squeeze someone to death, something we'll see happen in an interesting episode next week when we talk about the Bennington Triangle. So as for what this creature is, well, I'm not entirely sure. Could it have been a misidentified bear? Most certainly, and I'd almost venture to say that this explanation is more likely. That being said, as you'll see in the Bennington Triangle episode, a lot of really weird things happen in these woods, and some say that some of these strange disappearances in the region are due to something that isn't quite bear or human, but something in between. Now, moving on from our hairy friends, we're going to discuss what I think is the most iconic group of strange creatures in Vermont. The aquatic creatures that dot their many large lakes and are, strangely, not as menacing as you might think. First off, it's time for some fun complaining. Whenever you talk about aquatic cryptids in Vermont, it's always about Champ. Champ this, Champ that. Oh, I'm gonna go have a Champ burger at my favorite restaurant, or have a Champ-themed margarita in Burlington. Well, you know what? I'm sick of this. Don't get me wrong, I love Champ. But in the spirit of cryptid equity, I'm covering Memphrey, Champ's half-Canadian brother, before I cover Champ in this video. Lake Memphremagog, a glacial freshwater lake straddling the border between Newport, Vermont, and Magog, Quebec, has long been home to tales of a mysterious creature known as Memphrey. The lake's name is derived from an Algonquin word meaning large expanse of water, which suits its ancient origins, I guess. I don't know, it's a lake, so yeah, it's a large expanse of water. But regardless, it formed around 11,000 years ago and averages about 51 feet in depth, deep enough, some say, to conceal a monster. Memphrey, and I suppose Champ, are often likened to Scotland's Loch Ness Monster, fitting the familiar profile of a long-necked, serpent-like lake cryptid. While indigenous legends may include early references to the creature, the first reported European sighting dates to 1816, close to the same timeline as the earliest Champ sightings, and hundreds of encounters have been recorded since. Descriptions of Memphrey vary. Some say Memphrey resembles a serpent. Others claim it has fins, legs, or even a plesiosaur-like body with a horse-shaped head. It holds a prominent place in both Vermont and Quebecois folklore, even appearing once on a commemorative Canadian quarter. The 1816 sightings were documented by Ralph Mary IV in an 1854 journal later discovered hidden under floorboards during renovations at the Mary House in Magog. Witnesses included Uriah Jouett of Georgeville, Quebec, along with Stuart Chanel and his wife, who described a 30-foot-long serpent with a horse-like head and a visible neck above the waterline. A more modern enthusiast is Barbara Malloy, who chronicled many of these encounters and claims to have seen Memphrey multiple times. One such sighting occurred at about 5 p.m. on August 12th of 1983, from a car overlooking the lake near Horseneck Island. She described seeing a fast-moving, dark brown creature creating a wake like a speedboat, with a long neck and a body she believed was longer than a house. After swiftly moving through the water, the creature would submerge itself and vanish. Now, among the most well-known stories of Memphrey is that of Billy Connor, who at 19 became the first person to swim the full length of Lake Memphremagog in 1955. In a letter written in 1990, Billy actually revealed a bizarre experience from that swim. During a lightning storm, you see, he claimed to sense a warm presence about 30 feet below him. Following this presence, he became separated from his escort boats. As his companions called out, Billy reported that the water ahead of him burst open, and a strange head emerged. He described the creature's lips as pursed like lipstick, conveying a strange but comforting friendliness. In what he interpreted as a nonverbal gesture, the creature actually seemed to be telling him not to be afraid by kind of smooching at him, at least if I'm interpreting the story right. And Billy claimed the entity guided him for the rest of the swim, staying about 40 yards ahead of him until he reached Magog. Connor's tale wasn't the only one involving swimmers. In 2011, swimmer Charlotte Bren participated in a 25-mile swim across the lake. Now, this is kind of fishy, but it was part of an event promoting, 1, open borders between the US and Canada, which I can get behind that, and 2, they were looking for Memphrey, so the idea of Memphrey was already in their heads. See, late at night, after strong winds blew her kayaker off course, that was her escort, Bren was briefly alone when she felt something touch her thigh twice. She reported feeling a sort of buzzing sensation and hearing a humming sound, likening it to what she expected an electric eel would be like, though, of course, no electric eels are known to inhabit this lake. And then after a few moments, the sensation stopped. Bren's account prompted Velma, an 84-year-old woman, to come forward with her own 1974 encounter of Memphrey. This one occurred on July 4th, and while boating with family at around 11 p.m., she saw a 30-foot streak of light beneath the water. A solid, unmoving object then passed by the boat on its starboard side. Initially thought to be the size of about a blue heron. Realizing it might be something's tail, though, and hearing stories about Memphrey before, they gave chase, until they stopped the boat to avoid hitting anything. The mysterious object stopped as well. In the boat's spotlight then, they saw a head rise above the water. It was about 8 feet out of it, with a curved back like a bird or a turtle. The creature then turned to face them. Its head was roughly 3 feet wide, it had a neck that was a foot thick, and its eyes were about as big as baseballs. Its skin was black or brown, and it had a pale yellowish glow on it as well. Now, at this point, they realized they didn't really know where they were in the lake, and so as not to hit a rock or a submerged tree or something, they abandoned the pursuit. But the creature apparently then began to follow them at some distance for 10 minutes. Altogether, these stories of Memphrey paint a picture of something strange and persistent in Lake Memphremagog. Serpent, spirit, or maybe simply a misunderstood presence in the depths. So whether Memphrey is an undiscovered species, or maybe the product of vivid imaginations, you can't deny that many who venture out onto the lake seem to leave with a story. So now we're on to Champ. Something I've always found curious is that, sure, while there are numerous legends of large aquatic creatures the world across in our oceans, it's our lakes that seem to harbor our best-known underwater cryptids. And, at least in my impression, the creature that is likely the second best-known aquatic cryptid the world across resides in none other than Lake Champlain, which borders Vermont and New York. Champ, of course, is the name given to this supposed lake monster, having been named after the lake and in some ways becoming the lake itself. While Champ is often regarded as a tourist attraction today, reports of this creature actually go well before the modern era, and I think the best way to present this story to you is just by going through the chronology of supposed sightings of Champ from start to finish and pointing out what credence there is along the way. To start, indigenous groups in the region described similar creatures in their oral traditions. Some tribes that made up the Iroquois Confederacy, for instance, including the Mohawk people, had legends of giant aquatic serpents in Lake Champlain, one of which was called the, I'm going to put it on screen because I'm not going to butcher that and I couldn't find an example, that called the region home. The Abenaki, a native tribe, often referred to as the original Vermonters, called a similar creature the Gitteskog, or Gitteskog, I think is how it's pronounced. In the 1800s, upon the advent of European colonists, the Abenaki reportedly warned the French fur traders in the region not to disturb the waters of Lake Champlain because of this Gitteskog that they believed lived within them, cautioning them that it would bring misfortune to all involved if they didn't heed their warning. Also, if you can't tell, there were numerous Native American tribes that considered Lake Champlain, and thus its monster, as important. This actually harks back to the lake's original name, which, again, I'm going to put for you on screen, and that's a word in Abenaki, which means the waters between, and this reflects the lake as a sort of border between different tribal lands. Now, regarding the first European sightings of Champ, a widely circulated but inaccurate claim states that the French explorer Samuel de Champlain, for whom the lake is named, was the first European to see Champ. A 1970 summer issue of Vermont's Life magazine, definitely the place where I get my history about the early Americas, claimed Champlain documented a, I quote, 20-foot serpent thick as a barrel with a head like a horse. Which, this is mean, reminds me of someone I dated once. What Champlain actually described was a large fish called a chaufferot by local people, likely a long-nosed gar from what I'm looking up. He noted it could reach 8 to 10 feet in length with a long snout, sharp teeth, silver-gray coloring, and scales that, I quote, were so tough that a poniard could not pierce them. It's worth noting his descriptions align more closely with species of fish in the region, maybe not mythical lake creatures. Furthermore, this description was of a fish in the St. Lawrence River, not really in Lake Champlain. The first, more credible European account of a lake monster sighting appeared in the Plattsburgh Republican in 1819, in an article titled Cape Ann Serpent on Lake Champlain, which recounted a report from a man named Captain Crumb, not to be confused with the one who crunchitizes people, who claimed to have seen a 187-foot-long Black Sea creature from about 200 yards away. He said it was being followed by 2 lake sturgeon and a billfish. Crumb described the creature as having 3 teeth, eyes the color of peeled onions, whatever that means, a red band around its neck, and a white star on its forehead. All of this, mind you, was seen from 600 feet away. Whatever eye care supplements he was taking, I would like some. In 1873, more sightings were reported. The New York Times, for instance, ran a story about a railroad crew seeing the head of a large serpent with shiny, silvery scales glinting in the sun. That same year, Sheriff Nathan H. Mooney said he saw a 25 to 30-foot long water serpent about 100 yards from shore. He reported that the inside of its mouth had round white spots. Mooney's status as a local authority figure spurred additional people to come forward with their own sightings. Additionally, later that year, steamboat captain W.B. Eddy reported an encounter in which his vessel allegedly struck the creature, nearly causing the boat to capsize, an event that was supposedly witnessed by tourists on board. To be completely clear, if I had passengers aboard my vessel and I struck something in the water, I, too, would blame a legendary lake monster if I could. Around this same time, the oh-so-famous showman, charlatan, and general lousy person P.T. Barnum, known for promoting unusual curiosities such as people with disabilities, offered a reward for the capture of Champ, first in 1873 and again in 1877. Clearly, he wanted to add threatening and endangered species to his repertoire of accomplishments, but in this case, he didn't get the chance, luckily. Then in 1906, the Middlebury Register published a report that the creature, described as an, I quote, animal fish, was seen across from Charles L. Parrish's property on November 23rd. The witness was Lewis Wilkinson, a ferry operator from Port Franklin. He claimed the creature was 30 feet long and fast-moving, and that it had also been spotted recently around Port Henry. The article also noted that the animal might be capable of leaving the water. I actually find this part curious, as this is the only article I saw mentioning any amphibious qualities. Sadly, I don't think this detail stuck, as I don't see it later. Another sighting came in 1945 when passengers aboard the SS Ticonderoga, I think is how you say it, I probably said it wrong though, reportedly saw the creature as well. Now, despite all of these plentiful sightings over the years, it was the 1977 Manzi photograph that brought Champ into a wider public view. This occurred when Sandra Manzi was vacationing with her family, and she supposedly took a photograph on Lake Champlain that appeared to show a large creature breaching the water that resembled a dinosaur. It was, as I said, sticking its head out of the water. I say supposedly, by the way, because the location of this photo was later deemed to be no deeper than 14 feet of water, making it pretty darn unlikely that a large aquatic mammal would have swam or hidden there. Additionally, Manzi said she had discarded the original photo negative, which made further analysis difficult, and some assert was maybe a purposeful effort to obscure her findings. She also couldn't remember the exact location where the photo was taken, though this was found later. But in the short run, this complicated size and distance estimates. Philip Raines, a nautical expert from SUNY Plattsburgh, the State University of New York in Plattsburgh, reviewed the photo and flagged the missing negative and unknown location as critical issues that prevented authentication, though he didn't speculate on whether this was intentional. Now, I should be clear, this next detail is dubious, but in 2003, researchers from the Fauna Communications Research Institute, who were accompanied by folks from from the oh-so-credible Discovery Channel recorded strange underwater sounds in Lake Champlain that resembled the echolocation noises of beluga whales or dolphins, and asserted that they had discovered evidence of champ. Now, as if that wasn't unscientific enough of a conclusion for you, I should note that while these animals do not typically inhabit the lake, a beluga whale skeleton was discovered in 1849 near Charlotte, Vermont, a much more recent occurrence than the last known plesiosaurs, the dinosaur-like creatures sometimes cited in champ stories. Despite my skepticism given the Discovery Channel's involvement in this, I'll admit that the possibility remains that echolocation was indeed captured in the lake, and if it truly was, that's intriguing. Going on, in 2005, two men, Dick Affolter and Pete Baudet, filmed a video in which a creature resembling a plesiosaur appeared to be swimming in Lake Champlain. While some people interpret the footage as showing a fish or eel, retired FBI forensic image analyst confirmed at the very least that the video was not doctored. However, they couldn't determine what kind of animal, if any, was actually depicted. Also, this part is my favorite. In 2023, while filming the movie Lucy and the Lake Monster, a fictional story about a young girl and her grandfather searching for champ, the filmmakers captured drone footage in Bulwagga Bay, just south of Burlington on the New York side of the lake, and the footage showed what appeared to be a large object moving around or swimming just beneath the water's surface behind their boat. The filmmakers called this, I quote, foundational evidence of champ, but then only released a 10-second clip of the full 5-minute recording to the public. So anyways, that's the chronology of sightings of champ, Lake Champlain's own Loch Ness Monster. My main takeaway here is that it reminds me of the Loch Ness Saga. There's something about a lake's ability to obscure what lies inside of it that makes people far more open to the possibility of something seemingly impossible dwelling within it. Simply put, in cases of an aquatic cryptid, to me at least, it seems there's more consistency in the number of sightings over time than their land-dwelling counterparts. Historically speaking, I guess what I mean by this is there's hardly a 30-year gap between meaningful sightings of champ, and that gap has become annual in modern day. I find that pretty fascinating. Now, real or not, champ remains a celebrated figure in the region. On the New York side, the town of Port Henry has erected a statue of champ and hosts an annual Champ Day each August. In Vermont, the minor league baseball team is named the Vermont Lake Monsters, with champ as their mascot. In the 1980s, both New York and Vermont passed laws officially protecting champ, giving the creature legal status regardless of scientific confirmation. In short, people really love this cryptid, and personally, every time I'm in Burlington, even though I'm a bit of a skeptic on this, I take a moment to admire the beauty of Lake Champlain. And I should be clear while I'm doing this, I'm actually just looking for a serpent with a horse-shaped head out there taking a peek into our world above the surface. Ha, and you thought we were done, didn't you? Nope. See, crazy as it sounds, Vermont, you've got yet another supposed monster, or I guess monsters, dwelling in your aquatic ecosystems. And this one, it's supposedly in Lake Willoughby. Lake Willoughby is in Westmore, Vermont, and it's well known for its clear waters and its stark contrast with Mount Pisgah and Mount Orr, which line its sides. I saw it written on one account of this lake that as you swam in it, it feels like someone is watching you, and when the sun passes behind these mountains, there's a sudden, eerie shadow cast upon you. This eerie feeling, too, probably feels quite justified when you consider what exactly was documented here beginning back in the mid-1800s. See, in 1868, in the Caledonian newspaper, if you had opened it and taken a look, you would have read, "It is reported that the great water snake at Willoughby Lake was killed Wednesday of last week by Stephen Edmonds of Newport, Vermont, a lad of 12 years. Rushing boldly upon the monster, he severed its body with a sickle. On actual measurement, the two pieces were found to be 23 feet in length." And this, at least to me, begs the question, how the heck does a massive eel get into a 5-mile-long inland lake? Well, admittedly, this doesn't really answer the question very well, but the folklore goes that there's actually an underground passage between Lake Willoughby and another lake, Crystal Lake, and that this creature came from there, with some speculating that these tunnels stretch further, perhaps even to the Great Lakes or to the Atlantic Ocean. There's also more to this tale, but that will go into the weird folklore video, so stay tuned for that. Also, that's not all. See, in the 1950s, a man capsized his boat, and when some divers went looking for him, presuming he drowned, they claimed they came across a gigantic hole at the bottom of the lake, out of which a nearly 8-foot-long eel swam right in front of them. Also, it's not just eels. See, on September 9th of 1986, there were actually reports that one Audrey Bessie of Monmouth Beach, New Jersey, actually came upon a creature that was sort of champ-like in this lake. She described whatever it was as a long, dark creature with 2 or 3 humps in the middle of the lake, swimming towards the south end, and saw this while sitting near the Wheelers' Camp's beach. This sort of thing makes you wonder, was this Champ, and does he too have a habit of swimming back and forth between some of the local lakes in their convenient underground tunnels? Now, regardless of what this was, at this point I've got to ask you, do you believe in Champ, or these giant eels, or that tunnels connect the lakes in Vermont, possibly to fellow lakes, or even to the Atlantic Ocean? This whole underground tunnels from lakes things really gets me giddy. It's scary stuff, and if it were true, it would be interesting, not just from a folklore, but also from a scientific perspective. Personally, I'd find it fascinating if rumors like this, and like those of the Luska we'll talk about in the future, happened to be true. Alright, so this last one's pretty scary, and it's a personal account. So I'm going to give you 3 seconds here, just to warn you and let you go to the conclusion if you don't want to watch something too scary. 3, 2, 1. Alright, well, if you're still here, this one time I was parked at the bottom of Mount Abraham, and I was about to go for a hike, and I heard a car coming up the road. Now, normally, you're anywhere within 50 miles of Burlington, and you think, oh, okay, it's going to be a Subaru, but it turns out it's a Chevy. And then the guy opens his door, and he's not even wearing a Carhartt hat or flannel. Vermont, thank you so much for a nice departure from the terrestrial cryptids I've become so used to when touring the South. Quickly, time for a bit of news, though. First off, keep an eye out for my live streams. For now, I'm doing them on this channel and uploading them to T-Spot after, but going forward, I'll probably start streaming solely over there. Also, I think I'm in a game here and there, probably horror stuff mostly, which is kind of in line with this channel. I guess I'm getting spooky over here. You can find a link to that channel, T-Spot, in the description, by the way. Next up, after this, I'm going to be covering your ever-so-strange stories in the Bennington Triangle, and then quite a few of your haunted places, although I'm not going to go for 30 like I usually do. I think I need to shorten it up or I'll go insane. So get ready to get a bit spooky. Finally, following that, we're going to do what I'm most famous for, and I'm going to cover your state's weird folklore before we move on to our next state, New Hampshire. And then, I'm going to continue our journey through New England. If you feel passionate about another place, though, let me know down below, and I'm always open to a pit stop while we cover New England. Otherwise, I just want to say thank you so much for watching, and remind you that whether you just looked down from your boat and saw something resembling a plesiosaur swimming about, or if you saw a bear romping around, and then it threw a pine cone at you, don't you ever forget, it's always story time.